mathematical models are, and not just mathematical models, mathematical ideas more generally, are having and have had this really significant impact on the lives of everyday people for a really long time. But I also think it's really important that people feel as though this is something that is being done with them, not to them.
Hello and welcome to Living Proof, the Isaac Newton Institute podcast produced in collaboration with maths.org. My name is Sara Khan.
And I'm Rachel Thomas.
And I'm Marianne Freiberger. That was Hannah Fry from an interview she did with us last November, and we'll come back to her later. This is the first joint podcast of maths.org and the Isaac Newton Institute of 2025. Sara, why don't you start off by introducing yourself and what you do here at the Newton Institute?
Thanks, Marianne. I'm the communications manager at the Newton Institute, which is a national and international visitor research institute that runs research programs on selected themes in mathematical sciences and its wider applications with other sciences and technologies, all to foster new collaborations and ideas. And what about you, Marianne?
Well, I'm one of the editors of maths.org. We are based at the Center for Mathematical Sciences, which is right next door to the Newton Institute. And maths.org is an online platform that publishes content about mathematics, but aimed at non-expert audiences. And it's all free or freely available. And the kind of content we publish is articles and podcasts mostly, exploring different mathematical ideas and applications on varying levels of depth. We produce this content in direct collaboration with mathematicians and researchers. So, for example, we have a collaboration with the INI, the Newton Institute, which is why we're here today with Sara, and which is why we have a joint podcast. And we also collaborate with other research groups and organizations. Rachel, is there anything you want to add to that?
Just that because we produce content in direct collaboration with researchers, it's such an amazing opportunity to be working with Sara and the rest of the team at the Newton Institute and the Gateway, because it gives us this opportunity to work with these amazing researchers who are visiting here for research programs and workshops, which just cover such a wide range of maths and such fascinating types of mathematics and related sciences. So in today's podcast, we'll be hearing our interview with Hannah Fry. Hannah's joining us at the Centre for Mathematical Sciences as the Professor of Public Understanding of Maths this year, and we were really pleased because she announced her new position at a workshop that Marianne and I organised with the Newton Gateway at the INI in November. And that workshop was about communicating research in the mathematical sciences, and it had academics, it had civil servants, it had people from policy and people from industry. Lots of different people came along. And we've had such a great time working with the INI. They supported that meeting and our network, Maths.org, but also the INI has so many other fascinating ways of supporting the communication of mathematics. We piloted and have run a couple of communications training workshops with Katie Steckles and Ben Sparks and Alison Kiddle. So, Sarah, the Newton Institute is clearly really invested in maths communications. So why is this important to the work of the INI?
Yes, absolutely. You see, mathematical data sciences are becoming more and more visible as a key tool in understanding and addressing societal issues. It is important that non-expert audiences are informed about advances in these areas, and INI realizes this immensely and provides funding to support maths ICOM networks across the UK. In fact, it is also holding another 2-day training workshop for up to 40 early career researchers in maths communications in the near future.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to running those if we get the chance to do that again.
Yeah.
Also, I know the Newton Institute supports Talking Maths in Public, which is a community of maths communicators and popularizers who put on a really interesting conference every 2 years where people who talk about mathematics in public, as they call it, get to share best practice, exchange ideas, things like that. So it's a really interesting organization to get in touch with for people who are interested in communicating maths.
And the conference is in August this year.
Yeah. And this brings us to one of the absolute superstars of mathematics communication, who is the mathematician Hannah Fry. And as Rachel has just mentioned, she has joined us in Cambridge as Cambridge's first professor for the public understanding of maths. And it's great to have such a professor here in Cambridge. So I talked to her last year when it first became known that she was going to take up this professorship. And it was fascinating to talk to her both about her own research as a mathematician and what she has to say about mathematics communication. So here she is talking to me about her own mathematics back in November last year. So in your role that you say, you're professor of cities.
Yeah, the maths
of cities. So what's that about? And can you give an example of the kind of work that you've been doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this was it's an interdisciplinary department that I joined about 10 years ago after my PhD. And the idea was always that I mean, it was kind of like the beginning of like big data, right? And like the Internet of Things. Maybe not the very, very beginning, but the point at which actually we had enough like computational power to be able to and really rich, good data that you could start to run mathematical models about human behavior. So it's you know, there was a mixture of people in the department. There's sort of lots of geographers, lots of physicists, lots of mathematicians, architects, urban planners, all of that kind of thing. And the idea would be that we would look at systems that you find in cities. So lots of work on transport, lots of work on crime, actually, which I was a big part of for a number of years. Anything really to do with people moving around in space and time, and it was mathematically modeling those systems.
And taking, for example, crime, like what kind of things did you model?
Well, so this is, it turns out, right, that if you look at the way that burglaries happen across a city, there are actually some very clear patterns that arise. So the chances of you being burgled are actually highest when you've just been burgled, which is, it sounds a little bit counterintuitive. But the thing is that burglars sort of get to know the you know, the layout of your house. They get to know the layout of your neighbors' houses. Generally speaking, you know, sort of streets have a very similar layout in their houses, and also people replace their items. You know, you buy a new telly or whatever it might be. So a few years ago, there was some work to see whether you could come up with a mathematical prediction of where burglaries might happen next. And the mathematical ideas that actually ended up fitting really nicely is something called self-exciting point processes. So essentially, it's where you have like this kind of background rate, this background Poisson process. But then once an event happens, you can't really predict where that first event will happen. But once it happens, it increases the probability of subsequent events. So this is a mathematical technique that's been used a lot in earthquake, in aftershock prediction, that kind of thing. And actually, it turns out that it fits really, really well. Like it does a really good job, especially when you start taking into account things like the street network, the type of people who are passing by. So there's a big difference between whether the footfall on a street is local or just, you know, whether they've got investment in the area or not, you know, sort of an emotional investment. And it means that there are certain parts of the city that are already at a slightly higher probability of being targeted than others. So all of this stuff is really interesting, very kind of, you know, academically interesting. The slight problem is then what you do about it, right? It's like how you actually go and put that theory into practice. And I was never actually part of a project that really did that, but there were a number of projects, some of them very successful actually. So there was one project in Birmingham, I think, where they ran a trial where when the probability of being burgled increased, they would post a leaflet through your door saying, make sure that you lock up your doors and your windows. There's been a burglar in your area. The chances of, you know, your chances are an increased risk. And that actually did very well. There were other people, slightly more controversially, who decided to create predictive algorithms and sell them to police, which then, I mean, it actually I can understand the idea, but I also think that the problem is that you're then creating a feedback loop, which you're not taking into account in the original model. So, of course, if you are sending police to areas where you predict that there's a higher chance of crime, you're also increasing the chance that police will detect crime there, and so you end up getting this sort of self-fulfilling prophecies.
Are you going to continue research like that when you come to Cambridge?
No, no. So I think that this kind of stuff, the so I mean, it's not just burglary and crime. I mean, there's lots of things like shopping. There was some work a few years ago looking at um, TB in badgers, right? Which sounds like it's completely different, but actually it's a similar thing. It's about the movement in space and time of sort of individuals. Lots of epidemic stuff as well, actually, in advance of epidemics being quite the research hot topic that they became. But I think that actually what's happened in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, maybe a little bit longer, is that my focus has shifted much more to the ideas about how you actually engage people who are not mathematically trained in these ideas. Because I think that what happened with the burglary stuff that I just described to you there, I think is a really clear example of how when you create a mathematical model, it doesn't really matter how good your maths is, right? It doesn't really matter how beautifully crafted your equations are, or how accurate even your simulations are. You have to think about how the work that you've created is going to be seen and perceived by other people, and how it's going to be understood and misunderstood, because you can't just build something. This isn't like physics, right? Where you can just sort of build something that describes the world and then, pop it on a shelf and decide whether you've created something good as though it exists in isolation of the world around it. When you're handling stuff that interacts with people, you really have to think about how that interaction between the human and the algorithm works, and the sort of the biases that come into play with the way that humans understand these things. So that's a lot of, so in the last few years, those are the things that I've been really thinking about and writing about. And I guess sort of testing out in a very informal way in the public communication work that I've been doing. And so when I come to Cambridge, I really want to go much more into that side of things, because I think that it's a really, really, really crucially important and often overlooked aspect of the work that we do.
That's really fascinating. I mean, first of all, we did see that in the pandemic. We saw that building mathematical models without taking people and their behavior into account was hard, but also that the understanding of the public was really important in order for them to be able to understand or to engage with that work. And it's really interesting. So then your interest in the public engagement is not something that just runs parallel or disconnectedly from your mathematics. It's actually an integral part of the research that you did.
And I really think it is. I really think it is. And I think that, as you say, the pandemic is the perfect illustration that there were points in time during the pandemic where we had actually really good understanding of what was happening and what was happening next. But without that public communication aspect, it was pointless. It's completely pointless. There is nothing. If we kind of create these beautiful mathematical models and keep them within our community, then we're sort of not really doing anything. So I think that this part of it, and I think that actually, especially as we move forwards in time, I think that there has been a paradigm shift in terms of the amount of analysis that happens around human behavior, around how sort of automated decision making happens, about how integrated, algorithmic processes are in everyday life. And I really think that actually it's only going to become more important that we continue to engage in these things, because I think that mathematical models are, and not just mathematical models, mathematical ideas more generally, are having and have had this really significant impact on the lives of everyday people for a really long time. But I also think it's really important that people feel as though this is something that is being done with them, not to them. And I think that actually that's a mistake that the mathematical community has made a little bit in the past.
Yeah. So as for your new role, do you already have any concrete ideas of what you'd like to get started on?
Concrete ideas. Let me think. Okay, so there's a few things that I just haven't had the opportunity to really dig into, and some of it I think is the follow on from some of the work of David Spiegelhalter. So I made a film a couple of years ago called Making Sense of Cancer, which looked really into these ideas of communicating statistics when you yourself are the number, right? Because I mean, so this is like a personal experience that I had, where obviously I've been working with numbers and uncertainty and probabilities and so on for years and years and years, and then all of a sudden, when I myself was diagnosed with cancer, I realized I had no idea what 9 out of 10 means, right? Like I was told at one point, once I got the all clear, that the chance of the cancer coming back was 1 in 10, right? And that if it came back, they wouldn't be able to cure it. And I suddenly realized that like I have no idea how to sit with that number. I have no idea how to interpret it. Because ordinarily I think my brain isn't really capable of like understanding the nuance between, I don't know, like 90% and 85%. It's like if it's over 70, I just assume it's what? It's 100. And if it's under, maybe I can just about handle 50-50. But like, these numbers are not actually natural to interpret when it's about you. So I made a big film about that idea, but also about how that impacts in the way that we approach cancer treatment in general. Because one example from that film was I met this woman called Anne, and she had just had breast cancer, and she had had a tumor removed, and then she was in with her doctor, and I was sitting in on this oncology consultation, and the doctor said to her, okay, you're in your late 60s. If we don't do anything with you again, if you walk out of here and we don't touch you again, having just had the surgery, there's an 84% chance that you'll live another 10 years. But if we do everything, chemo, hormone treatment, radiotherapy, everything, we can increase that to 88%. And like, I think for you or me, in the kind of the luxury of being able to be dispassionate about those numbers, that feels like a very small amount. 4% increase, for all of the sort of the difficulty of chemotherapy and those other treatments, feels like a really big price to pay. But for Anne, who is like, emotionally invested in that moment, her reaction was, and I spoke to her afterwards. I went outside and spoke to her, and she was like, "Oh, I have to have the chemo because otherwise I'll die." Like she hadn't been able to understand those numbers. And I think that the solution that we've come to so far is just it's just sort of shouting numbers at people, right? Like just give them the numbers and let them do the interpretation. But actually, I think that we have been doing that the wrong way around. I think what we need to do is start with how people feel about their own future, how people feel about themselves, and then try and work out, what numbers they would be willing to accept. So sort of do it backwards. So that's definitely something that I want to pick up on where David Spiegelhalter left off, really, and work with some medics, but also with sort of psychologists, also with across the board. I think an interdisciplinary approach to try and improve these people's understanding of these ideas. So I guess it's going to take me a little bit of time to warm up to it. That's the absolute truth.
Yeah.
But in time, I really want there to be what I would really like. In general, is for there to be a kind of an agreement that mathematical communication is not this extra thing that you should do to tick a box, but that if you are creating something that is used by or interacts with or comes up with decisions for members of the public or the world in general, then I think that it is I think that it's genuinely your moral duty to engage the people who are affected by it. And so what I'd really love to do is to have Cambridge as a centre for mathematical excellence, for excellence of mathematical communication, where we aren't just trying stuff and seeing what sticks, but where we're really properly researching the best possible methods to communicate with people. And I hope that that ends up filtering through not just in the types of things that I've spoken about, like, you know, in medical care or in explanation of mathematical models, but I hope that it also ends up impacting the way that we view education too, and that we end up with, like, you know, really a population who's more appreciative of mathematical ideas, but maybe also more comfortable with them too.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say, because then that would lead to a completely different maybe entry point for people and interest for people, and maybe especially those that don't traditionally engage or are currently totally unengaged. So that would be amazing. I mean, that's such an amazing vision. Now, so as a researcher, as an academic, what do you most look forward to in coming to Cambridge?
Okay, there is something about the physical structure of your buildings, right? That is so perfectly set up for collaboration that I cannot wait for. Because I think in any academic environment that I've been in before, there's really, people are very siloed, you know, like in this interdisciplinary department that I'm in at the moment, is the best that I've seen, where you have a mixture of people in all together. But, you know, if I then want to go and interact with the mathematicians, it's sort of, they're in a different building, they're kind of way over across campus. It's really difficult. But I think that one of the things that I'm really looking forward to is just, and I know it sounds really simple, but just like sitting in mathematical Starbucks, as Colin calls it, and then having chance encounters and chance interactions with people that end up like sparking new ideas and new collaborations. Like that genuinely, I think, is the thing that I'm really looking forward to. Just that environment of knowing that every single person you speak to is working on something absolutely fascinating, and will have something incredible to tell you. And yeah, just the chance connections, I think, is the thing that I'm really, really looking forward to with exceptional people.
And what are you thinking of, or what are you hoping to bring to the education of the students?
Okay, in terms of the students, so I think that is the other thing that I'm really looking forward to is, well, aside from anything else, I think that Cambridge has managed to keep really sensible class sizes, where other universities have really struggled with that in terms of like financial pressures. So I think it's like kind of rewinding the clock for me, going back to the time when you could actually have really you could develop deep sort of intellectual relationships with your master students, with, you know, with your classes, where, you know, you properly are interacting with them. So that I'm really, really looking forward to. But in terms of what I can bring, I mean, I think that over time I've picked up a few little tricks here and there of how to make stuff extremely engaging while not pulling any punches in terms of the intellectual heft.
And I would imagine that you will sort of, like, whatever you end up teaching, whatever course you're going to be teaching in your first time that you teach a course there, will you bring that sense of the importance of communication in there right from the start, even if
Of
you're just
course.
teaching like a differential equations one?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, aside from anything else, I think that like the way that you teach it, right, or the way that I teach, I think, you know, almost by definition, like indicates how important I think communication techniques are, right? And I think that actually, if a student is feeling engaged and enthused and you know, and like excited and inspired by content, then I think that that kind of proves my point, right? That like actually there are ways to disseminate even really complex ideas that are more engaging than others.
Yeah. Now, going back to when you were a student, or even maybe before you were a university student, what interested you in maths? Why did you go into maths?
So I think that this wasn't so much a choice as more that I just never got to the point where I was done with it. You know, I wasn't like, right, I'm definitely going to be a mathematician and that's my ambition and off I go. It wasn't like that for me. It was that did my A levels, maths and further maths, and I just wasn't done yet. I wanted to do a bit more. And then after my degree, I was like, I want to do a bit more. Did my master's, was like, yeah, I'm just not finished with it yet. And I think that's genuinely how I felt at every point. And then one day I woke up and I was a mathematician.
Yeah. I kind of
you know what I mean? It's not sort of, yeah, like I've become one by default.
Yeah, it doesn't let you go that easily, does it?
It doesn't let you go that easily, exactly.
Do you have a favorite mathematical moment?
Oh, that's such a good question. What, from my own life?
Yeah, from your own
Oh yeah, I
experience.
do. I do actually. Um, okay, I think it's my favorite mathematical moment, not necessarily because it was the one which I was the most like elegant or sophisticated or anything like that. It's just because the level of frustration that I was feeling was at an absolute peak. Basically, when I was doing my PhD, there was one point where there was something wrong with this simulation that I was creating, and I could not work it out. And I genuinely spent 6 months working on what was wrong with this simulation. And I would go back to like a fresh sheet of paper and start it all again, rederive everything. And then I would start with a like fresh, and recode it. And I cannot tell you how many times I did it, and over and over and over and over again. And just like would like go into the office every single day and just again be annoyed at like what was I doing? Why was this? I think basically the two kind of ways around were not matching up, and I couldn't understand which one was right, which one was wrong, what I was doing wrong. And then there was one day I was working really late, and I was just like again super frustrated. And I got up from my desk and I went to go to the bathroom. And literally, as I pushed the door to the bathroom, I just had like suddenly it completely clicked into place what I'd been doing wrong for all of that time. And then I went back and it was like I could barely believe that I'd spent 6 months. Essentially, what had been wrong was it was like that I had different sections of simulation, and it was the join between the two that had been the problem. And so I'd been going over and over and over all of these different sections separately, but I'd never considered that the join was where the problem could have
So
been risen.
it fell between the cracks, sort of
It
literally.
quite literally fell between the cracks. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
6 months of my life.
yeah, amazing, isn't it? It's amazing. It's amazing how these things happen in
Yeah.
maths.
But I think it's just like there's something really fascinating about the human brain that you can think about something so carefully for 6 months, and then in like one moment of pushing a door, it will come to you.
So that was Hannah Fry talking to Marianne last year. You can find an interview with Hannah both at the INI website and plus.math.org. Just search on either side for Hannah Fry.
We'll include links to all the information that we've mentioned in the notes for today's episode. But that's it for this podcast. It's been a pleasure talking with everyone. If you've enjoyed the podcast, then please do let your friends know and rate and review us wherever you're listening. It really helps other people find the podcast.
Thanks for listening, and bye-bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.